dark courtroom. Two white officers in cuffs look up nervously. Rain taps against the courthouse windows. One officer shifts uncomfortably as heavy footsteps echo behind the bench. The door opens. A black man in robes enters, calm and composed. The officers freeze. It's him. They arrested him like trash on the street, laughed at his dreams, mocked his name. But today, he holds their fate in his hands. Rain drizzled down over cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights as Malik Turner walked steadily toward his apartment. He had just finished a long shift at his legal internship downtown, his head still buzzing with statutes and case notes. Wearing a khaki jacket and hoodie to stay dry, he clutched his laptop bag tightly. Inside were handwritten notes, law books, and a draft of a brief he'd spent weeks perfecting. As he turned the corner near the subway entrance, a police cruiser slowed behind him. It wasn't the first time he'd been stopped in this neighborhood, but this time felt different. The window rolled down. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Officer Cole shouted. Malik paused and answered respectfully. "Just heading home from work. I'm a law student at Howard." Officer Brantley stepped out, hand on his holster. "ID." Malik reached slowly into his pocket. "Sure, it's right. Hands out of your pockets," Brantley barked. Malik froze and lifted his hands. "I'm complying," Malik said, voice even. "Stop resisting," Cole snapped, even though Malik hadn't moved an inch. Before he could speak again, Brantley grabbed his arm. Malik flinched instinctively, and that was enough. He was yanked to the ground. His face hit the wet pavement as his bag spilled open, pages fluttering into the puddles. Cole knelt beside him and hissed into his ear. "No one's gonna believe a thug like you." Rain soaked through his clothes as people watched from apartment windows. Some pulled out phones, but no one came outside. He was cuffed, shoved into the squad car, and driven off. At the station, they fingerprinted him like a criminal, charged him with resisting arrest. Didn't listen to a word he said. Hours passed before anyone acknowledged he had no record. The charges wouldn't stick, they said, but no apology came. When Malik was released the next morning, his clothes were damp, his papers destroyed, and his sense of safety shattered. On the way home, he walked past the spot where it happened. His bag was still lying near the gutter, its contents scattered like trash. He stood in silence, not just angry, not just hurt, but changed. 2 weeks later, Malik sat quietly at the defendant's table, hands folded tightly in his lap, bruises faint but still visible on his cheek and temple. The city courtroom buzzed with indifference. No one cared who he was or why he'd been dragged there. To them, he was just another case on an overcrowded docket, just another black man accused of resisting arrest. The prosecutor didn't even try hard. "No sufficient evidence," he muttered, barely glancing at the file. The public defender assigned to Malik hadn't spoken to him until that morning. When the judge finally read the decision, it was without emotion. "Case dismissed. Insufficient cause for arrest. You're free to go." But the judge didn't look at Malik, not once. Before leaving the bench, the judge added casually, almost dismissively, "Just be glad you're walking out of here." Malik didn't respond. He didn't nod. He just stood, slow and steady, and turned toward the exit. As he stepped out, he caught a glimpse of Officer Cole standing in the back of the courtroom. The same smirk, the same arrogance. Their eyes met for a split second. Malik looked away, not because of fear, but because he refused to let the smirk win. Outside, the air was thick with summer heat, but it felt colder than the courtroom. He stepped into the light and was immediately met by Judge Helen Ramirez, his mentor, the one who got him his internship. She had watched the entire trial from the gallery without saying a word. "You handled yourself with dignity," she said quietly. "They didn't even pretend to care," Malik replied, voice dry. "They threw me into the system for walking home, and no one's going to be held accountable." Helen touched his arm gently. "You have two choices. Let this break you, or make you the one sitting on the bench next time. Judges change lives, Malik. You can't win fighting from the outside forever." He didn't respond. His silence said everything. That night, Malik sat in his small apartment surrounded by soaked notebooks and stained pages. His legal draft, once sharp and hopeful, was unreadable. He picked up a lighter. One by one, he burned the ruined pages in the sink. The flame swallowed his work slowly until all that remained was ash and silence. Then he opened a fresh notebook and began to write again. Law school was never going to be easy, but for Malik, it was war, not just against coursework or exams, but against the whispers, the side-eyes, the unspoken question always hanging in the air. Does he belong here? He lived off ramen and old textbooks. His laptop was second-hand, slow and missing 2 keys. At night, he cleaned hallways at a corporate law firm that wouldn't even consider him for an internship. He mopped floors that would one day shine beneath the shoes of attorneys. Sometimes he paused to glance into glass conference rooms and imagine himself there, arguing, winning, being heard. He carried the weight of that night, the arrest, the smirk, the judge's indifference, like a stone in his pocket. It made him work harder, sleep less. He studied under flickering lights in public libraries, sometimes until sunrise. On weekends, he volunteered at community legal clinics, helping others navigate the same system that once crushed him. In mock trials, he debated fiercely, cutting through arguments with clarity and control. One day, after a particularly tense round, his professor pulled him aside and said, "You argue like you've been silenced before." Malik looked at him and simply replied, "I have." By his 3rd year, things began to shift. He landed a coveted internship with the district attorney's office, an unlikely choice for someone with an arrest record, but his writing and reasoning outshined the stigma. The prosecutors learned to respect him. One called him the quiet hurricane. From there, he moved into clerkships, first at a civil rights non-profit, then under Judge Ramirez herself. Each step added another layer to his armor. He learned how judges think, how courtrooms breathe, how justice can be manipulated or reclaimed. The day he passed the bar, he stood outside the courthouse where it all began. This time, he wasn't in cuffs. He was holding a certificate that made him equal, at least on paper. Years passed, cases won, clients defended, laws challenged, and then a vacancy opened. At first, no one thought his name would be considered. A former defendant, a black man who'd once been slammed to the pavement for walking while black. But those who had watched him rise knew better. When the governor announced his nomination, reporters dug through his past. Photos of his arrest resurfaced. The press asked, "Is he qualified?" But the city already knew, because Malik Turner hadn't just learned the law, he had lived what it felt like to be crushed by it and come back holding the gavel. The courtroom was packed. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered. Families of victims filled the benches, clutching photos and court summons. On trial, Officers Cole and Brantley, charged with brutality, falsifying police reports, and perjury in at least 4 separate incidents. The officers entered in suits, not uniforms. Still proud, still carrying the posture of men who'd never been held accountable. Brantley straightened his tie with casual arrogance. Cole smirked as he scanned the gallery. To them, this was just another technicality, another circus they'd survive. Their lawyer leaned in. "Relax, you've been here before." They hadn't. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Footsteps echoed as the judge entered, but it wasn't just any judge. It was him. Malik Turner, now robed in authority, calm and composed, stepped up to the bench. His face was stone, no trace of a smile, no flicker of recognition. Cole's smirk faltered. Brantley blinked hard and whispered, "No fucking way." Malik sat, lifted the gavel. "This court is now in session," he said, his voice steady and precise. "Let justice be heard." The courtroom went silent, like oxygen had vanished. Neither officer could look at him directly. Their hands fidgeted, their confidence leaking away in real time. The prosecution laid out its evidence. Body cam footage, redacted reports, testimonies from victims. It was clear this wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern, a career built on profiling, on using their badge like a weapon, on lies written in ink and sworn under oath. As each witness testified, Malik listened without a word. No emotion, no interruption. He didn't lean forward. He didn't blink more than he had to. But the silence was powerful, heavy, controlled. When one of the victims described being slammed to the ground in front of his children, Cole flinched. When another described having charges fabricated because he talked back, Brantley shifted uncomfortably. Their lawyer objected often, desperate interruptions that couldn't stop the weight of truth. At one point, the defense suggested the victims were exaggerating. Malik calmly cut in. This courtroom will not permit the erasure of testimony for the sake of your client's comfort. Proceed. He didn't mention his own past. Not once. He didn't look at them like an old enemy. He looked at them the way the law should, without bias, without vengeance. But every word he spoke, every time he said overruled, every time he addressed them as the accused, reminded them of what they'd once tried to destroy. They thought they could bury him in a jail cell, but now, here he was, and he held the gavel. The trial stretched over several tense, emotionally charged days. Each morning, Judge Malik Turner entered the courtroom with measured calm. His robes were crisp, his demeanor composed, but behind his eyes lived flickers of memories, flashbacks that arrived like ghosts. The sound of keys jangling at his side, the cold metal of the handcuffs, his notes soaking in the rain, Cole's breath at his ear. No one's gonna believe a thug like you. Now, the same man sat beneath Malik's bench, eyes lowered, no badge to protect him. But Malik didn't flinch. He didn't gloat. He didn't even acknowledge the past. He simply let the law do what it had been created to do. Session after session, the prosecution laid out its case. Body cam footage revealed brutal takedowns of unarmed men. Dashcam audio captured racial slurs and laughing during searches. Medical records documented broken ribs, concussions, and trauma, all tied to Cole and Brantley. The courtroom watched in disbelief as the pattern unfolded. The officers hadn't just acted out once or twice. They had made violence a routine part of their job. Their reports had been sanitized, their behavior shielded by years of departmental silence. Then came the surprise witness. The courtroom doors opened and in walked a teenage boy, thin, shoulders hunched, lips scarred. He took the stand and the room went still. He told them he had been riding his bike home when the officers stopped him. They claimed he matched a robbery suspect's description. He didn't understand why they grabbed him, why they forced him to the ground. He begged them to call his mum. Instead, he said, they laughed and kneed him in the side, called him street trash. I was 13, he whispered. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. One juror visibly wiped away tears. Malik closed his eyes for a second, just a second, then looked up. Thank you for your courage, he said to the boy. The defense attorneys went on the attack. These are just emotionally charged stories, one argued. We have no proof this wasn't exaggeration. Malik leaned forward, voice cold and sharp. This court does not tolerate the silencing of the voiceless. Disrespect one more victim, and you will be held in contempt. The lawyer backed down immediately. The officers, once confident, tried to regain control. They stared Malik down when they thought no one was looking. Brantley's jaw tightened in anger. Cole shook his head as if the trial were beneath him. But Malik didn't break. He ruled on objections with balance. He enforced order with quiet authority. He allowed every voice to be heard, every truth to rise, no matter how painful. And when he read from the law, when he cited past precedents and legal standards, it was clear that this wasn't just about two bad cops. It was about the system that let them believe they were untouchable. One afternoon, during a break in the session, a young black lawyer approached Malik in the hallway and whispered, "Thank you for reminding them what justice looks like." Malik only nodded. Because for him, this wasn't personal revenge. It was justice, finally being done out loud. The courtroom was packed to the walls, not a single seat empty. A tense, collective breath held in the air like a storm about to break. After days of testimony, emotion, and undeniable evidence, the jury had returned. 12 solemn faces filed into place. The foreman stood. On the charges of police brutality, falsifying official reports, and perjury, we find the defendants guilty on all counts. No one moved. Then the sound of quiet sobs from the gallery. One of the victim's mothers buried her face in her hands. Officer Brantley sat rigid, blinking fast, as if he hadn't truly believed this day would come. Cole stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to look at the judge. Malik nodded and thanked the jury for their service. It was time for sentencing. The defense attorney rose and delivered a last, desperate plea. These men served this city. They've dedicated decades to law enforcement. We ask the court to consider their years of service. Mistakes were made, but they were not monsters. They were doing a dangerous job. Malik sat still, listening, without interruption. Then he folded his hands and spoke. "I remember the night you arrested me," he said, his voice measured, quiet, but unwavering. "I was walking home, not causing harm, not committing a crime, just walking." His eyes met theirs now, not with hatred, not with triumph, but with something deeper. You didn't see a law student. You didn't see a son. You didn't see a human being. You saw black. And that, in your eyes, made me guilty without evidence. The courtroom was silent. I remember the pavement, the cuffs, the smirk. I remember the silence that followed from the system that was supposed to protect me. He paused. But today, I don't judge you as that young man who was arrested. I don't judge you with bitterness or vengeance. I judge you as the law demands, with evidence, with precedent, with justice. Another pause. And justice requires accountability. He turned to the record. Officers Cole and Brantley, you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in state prison without parole. You will be stripped of your badges and barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity again. Gasps echoed. Some people clapped. Others wept. Malik raised his gavel. May this serve not just as punishment, but as a reminder that no badge is above the law. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and for the first time, those who once silenced others were silenced themselves. The community centre was filled with faces, young and old, students in suits, grandmothers in church hats, law professors, activists and everyday citizens. Cameras flashed as Judge Malik Turner stepped up to the podium, a calm smile on his face. The same man who once stood in silence while being cuffed now stood at a microphone surrounded by applause. Behind him hung a banner, the Turner Justice Scholarship, empowering the next generation of black legal minds. Malik looked out at the crowd, his voice steady and rich with meaning. I stand here not just as a judge, he began, but as proof that we are more than what they label us. I was once told I didn't belong. I was once dragged to court for walking home. But today, I stand on this side of the bench, not in spite of what I endured, but because I refused to let it define me. The room erupted in applause. He continued. This scholarship is for every young person who's been told they're too poor, too angry, too black, or too broken to stand for justice. This is our answer. Beside him stood Judge Ramirez, beaming with pride. She had mentored Malik when no one else would. Now she watched as her student became a leader. The media captured every word and headlines spread across the country. Former victim of police brutality becomes catalyst for legal change. Judge who sentenced corrupt cops launches fund for future lawyers. One by one, community members approached him after the press conference. A man in his 40s, eyes filled with tears, gripped Malik's hand. "You gave us back our voice," he whispered. "They did it to me too, but no one ever listened, until now." A group of students from a nearby high school asked for photos. One of them clutched a pocket constitution, her hands shaking. "I want to be like you," she said. As Malik walked outside into the sunlight, a news van was playing the evening coverage on a side screen. The image on display wasn't of the scholarship event. It was the mugshots of Officers Cole and Brantley, staring forward, expressionless, forgotten by the system they once abused. Malik turned away from the screen, not because he wanted to forget, but because he had more to build and a new generation to uplift. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the cracked sidewalks and brick buildings of the neighborhood Malik once called home. It had been years since he walked these streets without a purpose, tied to pain. But today, he returned not as a memory, but as a mentor. Beside him walked his nephew, maybe 10 years old, holding his hand and looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Uncle Malik," the boy asked, pointing to a faded corner near the old subway sign. "Is this where they arrested you?" Malik paused. He looked down at the spot. The echoes were still there. The rain, the sirens, the sting of the pavement, the echo of boots. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "but it's also where I found my purpose." His nephew looked confused. "How can something bad give you something good?" Malik smiled. "Because sometimes what breaks you shows you what you were made to fix." They kept walking, passing familiar stoops and faces that nodded with pride. Malik wasn't just a judge in a distant courtroom. He was the proof that someone from here could rise, could rebuild, could return without shame. Then they turned the corner, and his nephew froze. There it was, painted across the side of an old grocery store, a massive mural in vibrant colour. Malik stood tall in the centre of it, robed in black, a gavel in one hand and a law book in the other. Around him were the faces of others, men and women who had once been silenced, now painted with dignity and light. At the bottom, in bold white letters, read, "He was once silenced, now he speaks for the silenced." His nephew stared in awe. "That's really you?" Malik nodded. "That's all of us." The boy squeezed his hand tighter. "I want to be like you one day." "You'll be better," Malik replied. "You won't have to fight the same battles. That's the point." As they walked away from the mural, the city buzzed around them. Cars, laughter, music from a passing window. But Malik felt only stillness inside. He'd come full circle. The final words echoed not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but in the quiet of the street where it all began. They put him in cuffs, but he built a bench from the chains. And now he judges not with anger, but with truth.